At first, Mick Fleetwood once described it all as mostly a thrill, something exciting and powerful that carried him forward for years. But recent footage tells a very different story. His hands shake so badly that he struggles to keep his drumsticks steady. His voice often breaks in the middle of a sentence, as if the words are too heavy to carry. At 78 years old, the legendary drummer looks fragile, worn down by time and loss. This is the same man who held Fleetwood Mac together for more than 5 decades, the steady heartbeat behind one of the most famous bands in history. Now, his body is giving up on him. Christine McVie's death in 2022 shattered his heart. The devastating fires in Maui destroyed much of what he had built there and took away his sense of safety and home. Years of excess, addiction, and physical strain have finally caught up with him. Yet the most heartbreaking part is not what can be seen on camera. It is what Mick quietly told a close friend not long ago, something no one expected to hear. He admitted that the end feels closer than anyone realizes, and that thought now hangs over everything he does. Mick Fleetwood was born on June 24, 1947, in Redruth, Cornwall, at a time when England was still healing from the damage of World War II. Life was hard for many families, including his own. Food was rationed, clothes were reused, and money was tight. His father served in the Royal Air Force, earning a modest salary that kept the family living simply. Their home was not filled with luxury, but with discipline, structure, and imagination. Mick was the second of 3 children, growing up in a household where creativity mattered more than comfort. Even with limited resources, his parents made space for music. Jazz floated through the house from the radio, blending with the strict routines of military life. Those early years taught Mick resilience and responsibility. They also shaped a strong work ethic that stayed with him for the rest of his life and became the foundation of everything he achieved in music. When Mick was 4 years old, his family moved to Wales due to another RAF posting. This move changed his world in ways he could not yet understand. His surroundings were different, but more importantly, the sounds around him began to change. His father returned home one day with African drumming records he had picked up while stationed in Egypt. Mick became obsessed. He played those records over and over, listening closely to the rhythms that felt alive and powerful. By the time he was 6, he was tapping out those beats on pots, pans, and furniture. Soon, he began building his own makeshift drum kits out of boxes and anything else he could find. Those early rhythms settled deep into his mind and shaped how he understood music long before Fleetwood Mac even existed. Without knowing it, he was already developing a unique sense of timing influenced by cultures far beyond Britain. At the age of 10, Mick's life changed again when his family moved to Egypt. Cairo was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Music poured out of markets, festivals, clubs, and dusty streets. He heard Arabic drummers performing complex rhythms, and he also heard big band jazz echoing from smoky rooms. Mick absorbed every sound as if it was meant for him. He watched street musicians play with freedom and confidence, and when he went home, he tried to copy what he had seen and heard. By the time the family returned to London in 1957, Mick carried a mix of rhythms that set him apart from other kids his age. He felt different, but instead of holding him back, that difference slowly became his greatest strength. When he was 13, Mick convinced his parents to buy him his first real drum kit. It was small and squeezed into a cramped London apartment, but it belonged to him. He practiced constantly. The thin walls meant the neighbors could hear everything, and they often complained. His hands hurt, the floors shook, and sometimes the noise filled the entire building, but Mick refused to stop. Over time, his parents realized this was not just a phase. They began to support him more seriously. Those long hours of practice shaped the deep, steady groove that later became his signature style. As a teenager, he started sneaking into Soho jazz clubs like the Marquee and the Flamingo. These places became his unofficial classrooms. He watched drummers who played with emotion rather than strict rules. Philly Joe Jones became one of his heroes, and Mick studied him carefully from the shadows. He learned that feeling mattered more than perfection, and that instinct often mattered more than technique. This belief stayed with him forever. In 1963, at just 16 years old, Mick decided that school was holding him back. He left and moved to London full-time to chase music. He auditioned for bands, but his tall frame made him look awkward behind the drum kit, and his timing was still rough. One band rejected him for both reasons. To survive, he worked odd jobs, including shifts as a hotel porter, just to afford drum lessons. He lived with his older sister and practiced in her garage whenever he could. Those months were difficult and discouraging, but Mick refused to give up. In 1964, he joined his first semi-professional band, the Chesters. They played R&B covers in rough North London pubs where the floors were sticky and the pay barely covered a meal. Mick stood over 6 feet tall, making him impossible to ignore. But his timing often clashed with the guitarists, and arguments broke out, sometimes right on stage. The tension was intense, but it taught him how to handle pressure and showed him that music required teamwork, not just passion. In 1965, a fight during a performance pushed Mick to a breaking point, and he smashed his drum kit in anger. It was a low moment, but it led to something better. His sister loaned him money to buy a second-hand Ludwig drum kit, known for its massive bass drum and powerful sound. With this new kit, Mick chased gigs at clubs where young musicians fought for attention. That drum kit restored his confidence and helped him get noticed by more serious players. It felt like a fresh beginning. By 1966, he briefly joined a band called the Bow Street Runners. They toured Scotland in a battered van that often broke down, leaving them stranded without food or money. Mick slept in cold venues and survived on scraps, learning firsthand how brutal life on the road could be. Those experiences hardened him and strengthened his determination. Later that same year, Mick joined John Mayall's Bluesbreakers, a band known for producing top-tier musicians. There, he played alongside Peter Green and learned the fine balance between power and restraint. However, Mayall felt Mick was too wild and eventually let him go. Although it hurt, the lessons stayed with him. In July 1967, everything changed. Mick and Peter Green left the Bluesbreakers and formed Fleetwood Mac. Their first performance took place on August 13 at the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival. Heavy rain threatened to ruin their equipment, but they played through it. Promoters noticed their determination, and that performance helped them secure a record deal. Soon after, they convinced John McVie to join by offering equal songwriting credits, an unusual move at the time. Fleetwood Mac's raw blues sound quickly gained attention. Their early success led to the release of Black Magic Woman, which helped establish them as a serious band. Their debut album reached number 4 on the UK charts and stayed there for months. Mick's oversized bass drum became a signature part of their sound, even though transporting it was a constant struggle. Then came Albatross, a soft and dreamlike track that surprised everyone. Mick used mallets instead of sticks to create its floating feel. The song became a massive hit, reaching number 1 and selling tens of thousands of copies each week. Despite this success, problems followed. Disputes with manager Clifford Davis opened their eyes to how cruel the music industry could be. Chaos often followed the band on stage as well. Jeremy Spencer's unpredictable behavior caused clubs to ban them. Drug use and tension increased during tours, and Peter Green's mental health began to collapse after heavy LSD use. He started questioning the morality of making music for money and changed almost overnight. Eventually, he walked off stage during a show in Munich and never returned. Mick was forced to make the painful decision to fire his closest friend. That moment changed the band forever. More heartbreak followed with Danny Kirwan, whose drinking led to violent outbursts and his eventual dismissal during a tour. Each loss left scars on Mick and pushed the band further from its original blues roots. Bob Weston joined later, but his affair with Mick's wife led to another explosive breakup and a cancelled tour. Even worse, manager Clifford Davis later sent a fake Fleetwood Mac on tour without the real band's consent, leading to lawsuits that drained their finances. Mick eventually took control, becoming the band's leader by necessity. Christine McVie became a stabilizing force during this time, though even she nearly left due to personal struggles. Mick stepped in quietly to keep her in the band, knowing how vital she was. By 1974, Mick moved the band to Los Angeles to escape crushing taxes and legal battles. There, his cocaine addiction spiraled out of control, burning through enormous amounts of money. Recording sessions became chaotic, and Bob Welch eventually quit, leaving the band without a guitarist or male singer. Everything seemed broken. Yet, it was in this moment of collapse that the next chapter of Fleetwood Mac began to form, setting the stage for a future no one could have predicted. On New Year's Eve in 1974, Mick Fleetwood heard something that stopped him in his tracks. He was inside Sound City Studios when producer Keith Olsen played him a demo by a little-known duo called Buckingham Nicks. As soon as the music started, Mick felt a spark he had not felt in a long time. Lindsey Buckingham's sharp, emotional guitar playing grabbed his attention instantly, and Stevie Nicks' voice felt haunting and powerful. Mick knew right away that this sound could save his band. He invited Lindsey to meet with Fleetwood Mac, but Lindsey made one thing very clear. If he joined, Stevie had to come with him. It was not a suggestion. It was all or nothing. The rest of the band felt unsure at first, but Mick pushed hard, believing this was the moment that could change everything. By the end of December 1974, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks officially became members of Fleetwood Mac. Looking back, Mick later said it was the most important decision he ever made. That choice carried the band into an entirely new chapter and reshaped their future forever. Work on their next album began in 1975, and the energy around it felt intense and electric. Mick reached deep into his memories of childhood, especially the rhythms he remembered from Africa, where his father had once served. Those sounds influenced the way he approached the drums, giving the music a steady but hypnotic pulse. Stevie Nicks brought mysterious lyrics inspired by stories of witches and old legends, and she drifted through the studio with her dreamy presence. Lindsey Buckingham, on the other hand, pushed for tight structure and perfection, which often clashed with Stevie's more emotional and free style. Arguments broke out frequently and sometimes lasted deep into the night. More than once, Stevie threatened to quit. To ease the tension, Mick came up with an unusual solution. He invited everyone into his backyard for drum circles. They played rhythms together, letting frustration and anger fade into sound. Those moments helped shape the heartbeat of the music and brought the group back together. Around the same time, the song Over My Head was released and reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976. It felt like real progress and proof that the band was moving forward. While the music was climbing, Mick's personal finances were collapsing. Old tax debts from the United Kingdom resurfaced, and the pressure became unbearable. He sold personal belongings, including his treasured vintage drums, just to pay bills and keep tour buses running. Mick later admitted that he had bankrupted himself more times than he could even remember. Fame did not protect him from financial disaster. Between 1975 and 1976, the band launched a massive tour across the United States, playing around 150 shows. The constant travel and exhaustion pushed Mick far beyond his physical limits. During a performance in Dallas in 1976, his lung collapsed. Doctors told him to stop immediately, but Mick ignored them. He returned to the stage shirtless and played through the pain. Fans watched in disbelief as he forced his body to keep going. That moment became unforgettable and showed how far he was willing to go to keep Fleetwood Mac alive. As work began on the album Rumors in 1976, the emotional center of the band cracked once again. Mick, who was still married to Jenny Boyd, began a secret affair with Stevie Nicks. Their relationship started during the Australian tour after nights filled with heavy partying. They hid it carefully, knowing it could destroy the band if it became public. Stevie later admitted she fell deeply in love with Mick, and those emotions spilled into her songwriting. The studio became filled with missed drum takes, whispered arguments in hallways, and long nights that blurred into mornings. When Stevie discovered that Mick had also begun seeing her close friend Sarah, the pain cut deeply and added even more tension to the already fragile sessions. At the same time, John and Christine McVie's marriage was falling apart. They had been married for 8 years, but during the recording of Rumors, their relationship completely collapsed. In the studio, they spoke only about music and avoided each other otherwise. Christine began a relationship with the band's lighting director, while John turned heavily to alcohol to cope. Mick once again tried to play the role of mediator, moving between rooms to keep everyone focused and working. Christine later said she knew she could never make John happy again. Meanwhile, Mick's own marriage ended when Jenny left him for Bob Weston, reopening old wounds he carried silently. Pain piled on top of pain, yet somehow, the band kept creating music. Drugs were everywhere during the Rumors era. Reports later claimed the band spent around $180,000 on cocaine during that time. Lines were arranged openly on studio consoles, treated almost like a shared ritual. Mick often arrived so high that producer Ken Calais had to send him away from sessions. Stevie Nicks later said her doctor warned her that if she continued at that pace, it could kill her. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, the music carried raw emotional power. When Go Your Own Way was released in January 1977, listeners could hear the anger and heartbreak in Lindsey Buckingham's voice. During the music video shoot, tension exploded. When Lindsey sang the line accusing Stevie of wanting to pack up and shack up, she snapped and shoved him in anger. Mick had to physically step between them to keep the shoot from falling apart. That moment lived inside the song's energy and showed just how close the band was to breaking. Rumors went on to sell more than 40 million copies worldwide, turning Fleetwood Mac into global superstars. Mick Fleetwood became a millionaire almost overnight. He bought a large home in Hawaii and enjoyed the success briefly, but reality soon caught up with him. The IRS arrived, and old tax problems resurfaced once again. He had to sell assets quickly to stay afloat. Things became even worse when his accountant vanished after using $500,000 of Mick's money to buy a yacht Mick never even saw. The accountant fled to the Bahamas with millions more. By 1982, Mick finally faced the truth about how drugs, fame, and misplaced trust had drained his fortune. Mick later described 1977 as the year everything exploded. The Rumors tour was earning nearly $25 million, and the band was at the peak of its fame. Yet his personal life was spiraling. During the East Coast leg of the tour, Mick tried heroin for the first time, something he had always avoided. The consequences came quickly. One night in Boston, just before a show, he overdosed in his hotel room. He collapsed, stopped breathing, and was found by roadies who performed CPR while the clock ticked closer to showtime. They saved his life, dragged him back from the edge, and no one in the audience ever knew. Mick told no one in the band. He later said he was terrified the truth would destroy what little stability remained. Still, he kept moving forward. When Warner Brothers hesitated to fund the band's next experimental album, Mick paid for it himself. He invested around $800,000 of his own money into Tusk, an album driven by restless drumming and bold creative choices. When it was released, it sold about 4 million copies, far less than expected after Rumors. Mick personally absorbed a loss of around $300,000. Even so, he later said Tusk was his favorite album because it made him feel free, even though that freedom pushed him closer to financial ruin. The storms continued. During the Mirage sessions in the early 1980s, Stevie Nicks and Mick clashed constantly. Stevie often arrived late or disappeared for days, sometimes taking so much cocaine that she blacked out in the studio. Doctors warned her that she risked severe health damage, even a brain bleed. The tension became unbearable, and the band paused work. Mick fled to Ireland to escape the spiral forming around him. He later said it may have been the darkest period in the band's history. In 1987, they began work on Tango in the Night. Lindsey Buckingham was exhausted from years of conflict, especially with Stevie, and wanted to leave. When Mick heard this, he flew straight to Lindsey's home in Aspen. They spent 3 days talking, playing music, and trying to fix what was broken. Mick convinced Lindsey to stay long enough to finish the album, but the stress took a toll. Lindsey's health suffered, and once the album was complete, he left the band anyway. The outside world offered no relief. During the Mirage tour in 1982, the band's bus crashed in Ohio. Mick injured his wrist badly, and doctors told him not to play. He ignored them. That night in Cleveland, he performed using only one hand. The crowd watched in awe. Bootleg recordings of that show spread among fans, capturing a raw and imperfect performance that felt brave and human. Around the same time, Mick pursued a personal dream. In 1981, he traveled to Accra, Ghana, hauling nearly 10 tons of equipment to record a solo album called The Visitor. He lived simply, ate local food, and played with African musicians. Artists like Peter Green and George Harrison joined him. His credit card was cut off during the process, and the record label barely promoted the album. It reached number 43 on the Billboard chart and sold about 150,000 copies in the United States. Critics praised it, but financially it added to his troubles. Mick still called it a love letter to African music. By 1990, Fleetwood Mac released Behind the Mask, marking another breaking point. Lindsay was gone, new members filled the space, and Mick experimented with electronic drums. Fans disliked the sound, and the album sold only about 500,000 copies. Mick had to mortgage his Los Angeles home to cover losses. Soon after, Stevie Nicks left, and Christine McVie stepped away for a time, but the band never fully disappeared. On January 19, 1993, the classic lineup reunited for Bill Clinton's inauguration gala. They performed Don't Stop and earned over $1 million. Major stars watched from the crowd. Stevie was recovering from throat surgery, and Mick pushed through intense rehearsals. For a brief moment, the band felt whole again. In 2003, Lindsay returned for Say You Will. The tour was a massive success, earning nearly $69 million. Fans stood every night, cheering drum solos and old favorites. Still, tension remained. In 2004, Mick and Lindsay got into a physical fight backstage in Atlanta. The cracks never fully healed, but the tour continued, as it always did. Mick released his autobiography in 1990, shocking fans with its honesty. It sold over 100,000 copies and exposed dark stories the band had kept hidden for years. In later years, more pain followed. In 2014, Mick fell on stage in Dublin, injuring his knee and needing painkillers again. He fought the temptation to return to old habits. In 2018, Lindsay was removed from the band, leading to lawsuits and reopened wounds. Then came the Maui wildfires in August 2023, which destroyed Mick's restaurant and caused millions in losses. Worse than the money was the emotional pain. Maui was his home. Christine McVie's death in 2022 had already broken his heart. He called her his soulmate. Now, as he aged, Mick spoke often of loneliness and hope for healing. Even as his body weakened, his spirit remained strong, driven by music, memory, and the belief that creation could still bring peace.